And on to the big story this evening at 7 p.m. on a day when the Gujarat government passes resolution against BBC demanding the centre to expose the news agency's agenda to tarnish Prime Minister Modi's image. The British broadcaster's free speech hypocrisy has been exposed once again, this time over its decision to suspend famous football presenter Gary Lineker, who has been told to step back from presenting Match of the Day, the very famous show of the BBC which is broadcasted on the weekends. The decision came after a row over the comments he'd made while on the government's new migration policy. Now, the BBC says it considered Lineker's recent social media activity to be a breach of its guidelines. This has now landed BBC in the eye of a storm, with many questioning the broadcaster, as it has time and again tried to act like a proponent of free speech and had even questioned India after the IT surveys were conducted at its offices in Mumbai in the national capital. Remember, viewers, the BBC also rigged up the 2002 riots while blatantly disregarding the Supreme Court's clean chit to Prime Minister Modi in the case. What can be termed as a double whammy, the BBC's double speak, has been exposed. And on the other hand, Gujarat government has raised the heat against the broadcaster by moving a resolution demanding the centre to expose BBC's agenda that was aimed at maligning the Prime Minister's reputation, says the BJP. Several leaders from the Saffron Party have welcomed the move and have demanded all states adopt the resolution.
जिस व्यक्ति ने तपस्या करके अपना पूरा जीवन गुजरात को, ये देश को विश्व में एक अलग स्थान देने हेतु खर्च कर दिया, इस व्यक्ति को एवं भारत देश को बदनाम करने हेतु बनाई गई बीबीसी की डॉक्यूमेंट्री के बारे में विश्व की सबसे बड़ी लोकशाही वाले भारत देश के गुजरात विधानसभा और ये विधानसभा सदन में इकट्ठा हुए सभी विधायकों को मैं पूछना चाहता हूं कि क्या ये योग्य है? माननीय अध्यक्ष श्री, आ 156 ધારાસભ્યોનો અવાજ નથી, આ સંપૂર્ણ ગુજરાતનો અવાજ છે. માનનીય અધ્યક્ષ શ્રી, ગુજરાતના એક એક વ્યક્તિનો અવાજ છે. માનનીય અધ્યક્ષ શ્રી, મારી આપને વિનંતી છે માનનીય અધ્યક્ષ શ્રી કે અમારી ગુજરાત વિધાનસભાના એક એક સાથી ધારાસભ્યોની આ માંગ કેન્દ્ર સરકાર સુધી પહોંચાડવામાં આવે. માનનીય અધ્યક્ષ શ્રી, આ ઢોંગી બીબીસી દ્વારા જે ષડયંત્ર રચવામાં આવ્યું છે તેના ખિલાફમાં કડકમાં કડક માનનીય અધ્યક્ષ શ્રી એક્શન લેવામાં આવે એવી અમારા સૌ સાથી સભ્યોની માંગણી છે. માનનીય અધ્યક્ષ શ્રી, મારી આપને વિનંતી છે.
The BBC was inspired by some of our political parties here, and they showed a documentary defaming India and also Narendra Modi ji. Gujarat Assembly has rightly passed a resolution for an action and for taking steps with regard to the BBC documentary. I think this measure is welcome measure, and entire country, all the state assemblies should also adopt this resolution against the BBC to show that India is one.
And well, as far as reactions here in India are concerned, a certain ecosystem once again endorsing the controversial docu-series also continues to rally behind the broadcaster, with Congress leader, for example, Rashid Alvi, condemning the resolution that has been passed by the Gujarat state government.
BJP thinks Narendra Modi ji is India and India is Narendra Modi ji. It is I strongly condemn this resolution.
देखिए, डॉक्यूमेंट्री है, उसमें चैलेंज किया जाना चाहिए. यदि गलत है तो उसके तरीके हैं, उसके माध्यम से जा सकते हैं. लेकिन आप उसको बैन लगा देंगे, उसके यहाँ छापा डाल देंगे, डराने का काम करेंगे, तो ये उचित नहीं है ना. यदि गलत है तो उसे कार्रवाई होनी चाहिए. प्रस्ताव पारित करने से क्या होता है? उसमें कार्रवाई होना चाहिए. गलत है तो, और नहीं है तो फिर स्वीकार करना चाहिए.
Let's quickly open this up. We have human rights activist Rashmi Samant along with Dr. Suman C. Raman, political analyst, with us this evening. My first question is though to Dr. Suman C. Raman, because we just heard it from Rashid Alvi, several now coming out and speaking in favor of BBC, once again endorsing BBC, calling it a platform for free speech. But I want to then talk about what they did to Mr. Gary Lineker. Why have a problem with one of your employees who, by the way, is doing an excellent job, is loved by one and all, sir, suspend him because you think that everything that he's putting out on social media in the latest with regards to a certain controversy is breach of its guidelines. Are we talking about the same BBC, Mr. Sumansi Raman?
Yeah. Okay. First of all, I'm glad that you're doing this show today, because even as we speak, there is tremendous pressure on the BBC by many other commentators and anchors who have refused to go on air on Match of the Day and other such football shows today. I think that is where we see people standing up and taking a firm stand. I think you're not aware of this, but there are now calls asking for the chairman of the BBC, Richard Sharp, who is a government nominee and against whom there is a charge of having helped Boris Johnson secure £800,000 loan before he was appointed to the job, to step down. And
I think Dr. Sumansi Raman, I'm very well aware of the developments. I'm very well aware of the kind of pressure that is being mounted on BBC. I've done my research well. I've done my homework well. I can also tell you, taking it forward, Dr. Sumansi Raman, that 12 teams who are set to play the
Lineker will be back next week.
Premier League matches on the weekend have refused. They have refused to give any interviews, any request that's coming from the BBC. So that's the kind of backlash that BBC is facing. But yes, go ahead, make your point. Finish yourself.
Excellent. I think the point really is that there are people standing up, and they have not been called anti-Britain for standing up for what they believe in. Now, the very important thing is what the Gujarat Assembly passes. I mean, it's the consequences of that are very limited. I think they just, wanting to be more sycophantic, and show their loyalty, more loyal than the king, as it were. But as far as the BBC is concerned, what impact does a resolution in Gujarat Assembly have on the BBC? It doesn't hold any weightage. Now, my point is...
But doesn't BBC's hypocrisy stand exposed today in that sense? It's a plain simple question. While you're applauding the kind of criticism that BBC continues to receive, and that's only escalating, I'm simply asking you about the hypocrisy, the double standards that have been exposed.
This is exactly the problem that is happening in other countries too, where right-wing elements tend to occupy, with fairly dodgy credentials, as in this case of the BBC chairman, tend to occupy top jobs. You give this another 1 week. I challenge you, do the show next Saturday or next Sunday, and by the time Mr. Lineker will be back, because there is a storm in the UK, and there is a huge amount of outrage at what has been done to him, and all for the sake of a tweet. And with the kind of reactions that we have seen,
and I do appreciate, Dr. Sumansi Raman, that you're standing up for Mr. Lineker, and all that is fair as long as your opinion is concerned. But Rashmi Saman, does that address your concern? Is there a problem, or rather is there a problem in the Gujarat government now trying to reach out to other state governments or put out that message that, look, if we can pass a resolution against the BJP and we can put out this appeal to the centre, that so must you? And this is a living example of why.
Well, I think if the British Parliament can discuss Kashmir issues day in and day out, then the Indian Parliament and the state, assemblies do have the right to discuss issues that pertain to them, and that it's in the right spirit of democracy to do so. Secondly, I think this event pretty much sheds light on the double standards and hypocrisy of the free speech banner that the BBC so proudly touts on international platforms. There is clearly double standards. There's clearly, well-documented intentions at hand. And this is not just from this issue. This is not just from the, suspension of Mr. Gary Lineker. This goes way back, even during COVID, when there were lots of protests that I saw, when I was a resident there. These were not covered on the BBC, because then that would just show the UK in bad light to the world, because there was a lot of anti-vaccine protest that was happening, and there were lots of clashes going on with the police, and none of it was covered by the BBC, because there were clear instructions that the UK shouldn't be shown in bad light to the world. And this is something I've seen.
I don't think you watch the BBC.
And
secondly, Dr. Sumansi Raman, the fact remains that the fact remains, Dr. Sumansi Raman, while you're speaking up for Dr. Lineker, and I continue to appreciate it, you're taking a stand and you're speaking for him today, saying that, look, here's a man who's expressed his opinion and he must not be suspended from the show because whatever said and done, that's his personal opinion. All fair. Point taken. But the fact remains that this is the same BBC which was issued tax, which were in fact, whose offices were raided. Rather, IT surveys took place as per the income tax department. All of that happened, and that time it happened because of alleged non-compliance. And yet the same lobby, the same ecosystem here in India kept speaking of how, oh look, this is the Modi government trying to trounce on the freedom of speech and expression of the BBC, and that's the same language we're witnessing today.
Tell us what non-compliance? What non-compliance? How much was the money involved? No, tell us. No, tell us.
Not just in India, but also in the UK, where they've been heavily fined. If you're unable to come to terms with that, there's something wrong with the opposition of this country.
I think there is.
They need to be responsible in the
you
way
made
that
a
they,
statement saying the BBC did not.
The fact is simple. The fact is simple, Dr. Sumansi Raman. If the same BBC keeps talking about freedom of speech, freedom of expression, keeps taking on the Modi government directly or indirectly via several of its writing pieces, then the same BBC must practice what they preach. That's the simple point that we're trying to make. We'll have to quickly head into a very short break. That's all the time I have. Rashmi Samant, Dr. Sumansi Raman, thank you for joining us this evening. A short break with that.